Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a really big idea, one that kind of challenges the way we've all been taught to see the world. It's called world systems analysis, and it offers a pretty radical new lens for understanding, well, just about everything.
Okay, so let's just dive right in with a question. Have you ever been watching the news and suddenly some huge global event happens that seems to come out of absolutely nowhere? It just catches everyone completely by surprise. I think we've all felt that, right?
I mean, think about it. Back in the 80s, who really saw the Soviet Union just collapsing? And so fast, too. Or, fast forward to 2001. Suddenly, this group, Al-Qaeda, that most people had never even heard of, carries out this absolutely devastating attack. These things just don't seem to fit the script.
So, why does this keep happening? Well, according to a sociologist named Immanuel Wallerstein, this isn't some accident. He says the problem is that we're only looking at the here and now. We're getting such a small piece of the puzzle that our conclusions are, well, they're basically as disposable as yesterday's newspaper.
Okay, so what is the real problem then? Wallerstein's big argument is that it's not about the events. It's about the tools we're using to understand them, the very mental framework we've all been given. And the heart of that problem? It's that we're taught to chop up the world into these separate, imaginary boxes. We treat them like they're totally distinct things with no real connection to each other. And you know what? These boxes have names you'll definitely recognize. We call them disciplines at school or university. You've got political science over here, economics over there, sociology somewhere else, each one with its own little kingdom, its own rules, and its own way of looking at things. And they don't really talk to each other.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? On one hand, you have the usual way of doing things, which says, hey, the market, the government, and society, they're all separate things. You need different tools for each. But world systems analysis, it comes along and says, nope, wrong. They're all just different parts of one single, massive, interconnected system. You just can't understand one piece without seeing how it fits into the whole. Now that is a pretty radical thought, and Wallerstein knew it. He basically said that to get what he's talking about, you have to first unthink a whole lot of what you've learned. You actually have to start questioning the way knowledge is organized, the stuff you've been taught since you were a kid. It's like you got to break down the boxes before you can see the big picture.
So that begs the question, right? Where do these boxes even come from? Because they weren't just an accident of nature. Nope. They were built at a very specific time in history for some very specific reasons.
Okay, so let's look at the timeline. It really starts in the late 18th century with what Wallerstein calls this big divorce between science, which was all about facts, and the humanities, which were about values. Then, bam, the French Revolution happens, and suddenly the idea that society can change, that it's supposed to change, is everywhere. People needed to figure out how to manage all this change, which led universities in the 19th century to basically invent what we now call the social sciences. And how did they do it? Well, they carved up this new, modern world into what they saw as three main areas. You had the market, that's for the economists. Then you had the state, that's for political science. And then everything else, the civil society, was handed over to the sociologists. And by giving each one its own department, they really cemented this idea that these things operate on their own.
And history? What happened to history in all this? Well, it got its own box too, but it was kind of a weird one. Its job was to only look at the past, not the present. And not just any past. It was pretty much just the history of 5 big Western countries. France, Britain, the US, and a couple of others. It was as if the rest of the entire planet didn't really have a history that mattered.
Okay, so if thinking inside these little boxes is the big problem, then what's the solution? Well, this is where world systems analysis hands us a totally new pair of glasses to look at the world.
And here it is. This is the absolute heart of the whole idea. The thing that really shapes our lives, the social reality that dictates our choices. It isn't our country. It isn't the nation state. It's something way, way bigger. It's the world system itself. And this is not some new thing that just popped up with the internet or modern globalization. Not at all. Wallerstein says we are all living inside one single connected system, what he calls a capitalist world economy, and it's been running the show for more than 500 years. So let's look at the key moments. The first huge turning point was way back in the 16th century. This is when this brand new kind of social system, one that's all about the endless accumulation of capital, first appeared. It started in parts of Europe and just immediately began to grow, sucking more and more of the planet into its web and creating this structure of powerful core countries and exploited peripheral areas.
All right, turning point number 2, the French Revolution in 1789. Now, this didn't just shake up France. It basically exported a set of ideas that became the operating system, the geoculture, for the entire system. Things like democracy, citizens' rights, and this deep belief in progress, this became the political software for the whole world for the next 200 years.
And the third big moment, it's much closer to our own time, 1968, the protests that swept the globe. For Wallerstein, these weren't just a bunch of separate national protests. No way. This was a world revolution. It was the first time the system's dominant ideas and its promise of endless progress were seriously challenged from all sides. And he argues this was the moment the system entered its final phase, a long, messy crisis.
Okay, so what? Why does any of this matter? What's the point of putting on these new glasses and seeing the world as this 500-year-old system? Well, let's take a word you hear all the time, globalization. We're always told it's this super new thing that started, in the 90s? From a world systems view, that's just not right. When you look through this lens, globalization isn't new at all. It's just the latest chapter in a story that's been going on since the very beginning of the capitalist world economy. The constant push for new markets, integrating labor from all over the globe, creating these massive supply chains. Look, that's been the system's MO for 5 centuries. What we're seeing now is just a faster, more intense version of the same old game.
And this leads us to one last and maybe a pretty unsettling idea. If Wallerstein is right, if 1968 really did kick off a terminal crisis for this system, it means that we are living right in the middle of a massive transition. The system that's defined the modern world for half a millennium is breaking down. But what comes next? Well, that's not written yet. It's up for grabs. Which really leaves us with a huge question. Out of the chaos of our time, what kind of world are we going to build?